I have a lot to cover before the end of the hour, so make sure that you listen very, very carefully. The ancient Rosicrucians taught that the eternal feminine was not extracted from the nature of man, as Moses would have us think, but was rather made subservient to the opposite side of its own nature. They believed, you see, that every creature was essentially male and female, but for reasons which we will discuss later, only one phase of that nature manifested at a time. By fire, these philosophers taught that there was but one life force in the human body, and that man used it in the furtherance of all his labors, that he digested his food with essentially the same energy with which he thought, and reproduced his species with the same forces which he used in physical exercise. This force, personified, was said to be the builder of the universal temple. It became the Hiram Abiff of Masonry, the builder of the eternal temple. In Egypt, this force is symbolized by a serpent, and it is worthy of note that in ancient Hebrew, the words serpent and savior are synonymous. And that should be a great revelation to many of you out there. Now remember, I'm not asking that you believe any of this. I am merely revealing the esoteric meaning behind the stories that you have heard and read about in your education, in college, in your private life, in the movies, all your life. And yes, even in your churches. In ancient Hebrew, serpent and savior are synonymous. In the stanzas of Daisen, an ancient Tibetan fragment, it is stated that at one time a shower of serpents fell upon the earth. Now this is understood esoterically to represent the coming of the great world teachers, who have long been called serpents, or the gift to man of intellect by Lucifer through his agent Satan. You see, for at the basis of all of these esoteric mystery religions is the Luciferian philosophy. The savior of the Aztecs and Incas was called Quetzalcoatl, and this name means feathered serpent. From the serpent kings of Egypt to the feathered serpents of Tibet, the serpent is symbolic of the vital energies of the human body and is, in fact, a metaphor for the intellect, knowledge, gnosis. Moses raised the brazen serpent in the wilderness, and all who gazed upon it lived. Those who gained knowledge, who learned, survived. Those who did not, perished. Christ, whom they call the serpent reborn, says, quote, I, if I be lifted up, will draw all men unto me, end quote. The simile, folks, is obvious, yet few ever understand it. To the ancients, the magic wand was the spinal canal. Through this canal runs a sacred liquid, which they called in those days fire oil. Remember, these are the philosophers of fire. In Greek, Christos, the Savior, our Redeemer of things. And Christos are those who believed in this, were called Christians long before the birth of Christ. In Greek, Christos, the Savior, or Redeemer of things. This same thought has been preserved for Freemasonry under the heading, quote, the marrow of the bone, end quote. The Hermetic philosophers recognized this essence in man as a distillation of universal life derived from the atmosphere, the sunlight, the rays of the stars, and food. This universal vitality, upon which all living things draw, is probably the origin of the myths of the gods who died for mankind. It is undoubtedly the origin of the legend of the Last Supper, for man eternally maintains himself upon the body and the blood of this spirit of universal energy, according to those who follow the mysteries. If this energy, which passes through the conduit of the spine, is drained off by various parts of the body, it stands to reason that waste will ultimately result in want. They knew, or thought they knew, that it was very undesirable to do heavy thinking directly after eating. Just as today they tell you, don't go swimming right after eating, for at such times the vital energies are digesting food and cannot safely be diverted to other channels. The admonition that you cannot go swimming directly after eating is a leftover legacy of this belief. By analogy, one-pointedness is the basis of success, for when the bodily energies are divided against each other, they cannot perform their proper functions. The ancients, you see, taught that the normal individual had two distinct avenues of expression, the first mental and spiritual, the second emotional and physical. The mental faculties were radiant, powerful, dominating, and strong, but often cruel and cynical. The mind was called the positive pole of the soul, while the heart was called the negative pole. And we have been taught that the spirit expresses itself through the mind, the soul and the body through the heart. The ancient alchemists called the mind the sun and the heart the moon, for to them strength, reason, and logic were masculine, paternal, solar powers, while love, beauty, intuition, and kindliness were feminine, maternal, lunar qualities, reflecting the pure light of their master. Just as the moon reflects the light of the sun, love, beauty, intuition, and kindliness reflect the dominance of the strength, reason, and logic. Now this will probably make clear why gold and silver had to be blended in the great alchemical enterprises, for the gold and silver of the alchemists were not dead metals, but living qualities in human life. The marriage of the sun and moon was therefore the marriage of the mind and heart, or the two halves of every nature. It was the union of strength with beauty, courage with inspiration, and in its greater sense, the union of science with theology, or God with nature. The urgency of this alliance is evident in the world today, where cold intellectualism and commercialism need the finer sentiments of friendliness and altruism to offset their heartlessness. On the other hand, fanaticism, blind faith, and ungoverned emotionalism require the strong hand of logic and reason to steer them away from the rocks of insanity and death. Perfect equilibrium in human nature is very, very seldom found. In fact, it is nature's greatest rarity. A person with that perfectly balanced viewpoint, however, is the living philosopher's stone, for he has the strength matched with kindliness and justice tempered with mercy. Hermetic anatomy teaches that there are two small bodies in the brain which are identified with the living yin and yang of China, or the positive and the negative, the male and the female. In the same way, every person has a masculine nature and a feminine nature, and never do we find these two entirely disassociated. It may be that East Indian philosophy gives us our best light on this rather perplexing subject, pun absolutely intended, for both the Hindus and the alchemists agree that the spirit, like God, is androgynous, being both father and mother. And, bear with me, it states in Genesis, quote, God created man in his own image, male and female created he them, end quote. So, while the creation is singular, within the creation there is two. Listen to it again, and listen very carefully. God created man in his own image, male and female created he them. We would infer from this that God is both male and female. And indeed, if male and female both came from God, then this must be true, as God is all things emanated from God and from nowhere else. And as the spirit of man is of God, it must partake of the androgynous nature of its parent. And in harmony with the Eastern sages, sex exists no more in spirit than it does in the embryo before the 3rd month of prenatal life. Sex, you see, is a polarization of the body, a manifestation of spirit. The fetus, at one point in its development, can go either way, can be male or female. And all fetuses up to that point are exactly the same in their anatomy. But the germ of life itself is capable of projecting both the positive and the negative rays. So we now become involved in a still more perplexing problem, namely what governs the sex which the animal being is to manifest during life. Well, many people will tell you many different things. The ancient philosophers would turn to the Eastern sages, and they would say evolution is the continuity of form appearing in cycles and gradually unfolding from a simple cell to a complex organism. If a form evolves, it is not absurd to suppose that the cause of that form is also evolving. The Oriental philosophy solves one of the Western world's greatest problems by the law of reincarnation, something which has never been proven to be a reality by anyone, and can be traced to its origin at a point in Indian history where the poor threatened rebellion over the wealthy rulers, and all of a sudden this theory of reincarnation and karma cropped up to keep the poor lower classes in their place. And I haven't got time to go into that. This doctrine, which was removed from the Christian faith in AD 550 at the Council of Constantinople, taught that the spirit or life is immortal, that it descends into gross matter not once but many times in order that it may ultimately gain that perfection which no living creature has ever yet gained in one appearance in the world. They say, again, you must understand, none of this has ever been proven to be true. No one, on the other hand, can prove it to be false either. This doctrine also taught that the consciousness, thus descending into form, does not always appear in one sex, but alternates, first appearing in a masculine body and then in a feminine, in this way developing both sides of the nature symmetrically. Now, if you accept this doctrine, it will go far toward solving a number of problems concerning heredity and the so-called injustice and inequality in the world. Even without it, Hermeticism can still stand with its aid. However, the alchemical philosophies become far more clarified, and of course, you have the option of rejecting it outright. The ancient wisdom teaches that the circle of the creative forces in the human body is broken at the present time. One end of this broken ring is in the brain, where it furnishes the power or vitality which is the basis of brain function. The other end of this circle is located in the generative system, where it furnishes the means of reproducing the species. At a time remote in history, man was a complete creative unit in himself, they say, being capable of procreating his species like certain of the lower orders of animals of today. And if you believe in the theory of evolution, then this could be true. However, there is no proof of it whatsoever anywhere. There's no proof that the theory of evolution is correct, as a matter of fact. At that time, however, when these philosophies bore fruit, and at the time when man existed, they say, in this state, he had no mind. According to mythology, the raising of the brazen serpent therefore gave him a mind, remember the gift of intellect by Satan in the Garden of Eden, but broke the creative circuit. In the masculine sex, the positive pole of the life force is in the brain. The negative pole is used for generative purposes. In the feminine sex, the negative pole is in the brain. The positive pole is used for generative purposes. And again, this is the belief of those who follow the Hermetic philosophy. As a direct outgrowth of this condition, temporarily maintained in order that man may think and develop his higher nature and at the same time offer opportunity for other lives to come into manifestation, the institution of marriage was established.